welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. I am delighted to be with you, as always, to bring you another author interview. As we get started, I want to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. That really helps the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more readers, such as yourselves. If you would like to help the podcast in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip or a donation. That not only helps the podcast, but the network as a whole. It's greatly appreciated. If while you're there, you would like to leave a question or a comment, I am always happy to engage with those in a later episode. If you have any questions you're just dying to know the answer to, I'm happy to try to answer those. So again, if you want to help the podcast out in a monetary way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. Every bit of support you've given the podcast over the years is greatly appreciated. Whether you're new, whether you've been here since the beginning, whatever that support has involved, it is greatly appreciated. My dogs apparently think they want to chime in on this. So hopefully we're gonna put them in another room. But gsmcpodcast.net. You see it playing in the video next to me, and you'll see it scrolling throughout the episode. As we get started, how is your week going? It's Wednesday. I hope that your week is off to a great start. As you head toward the weekend, I hope you've got some good plans coming up for the weekend. My week is, as it's been lately, busy, which is good. I've had some fun students this week. I enjoy talking to them and continuing to get to know them as we have lessons together. It's just always fun to watch them grow and learn and see what kind of questions they come up with. One of my 6-year-old students was writing a poem the other day, and she said that blue tastes like Sarah. And I don't know what that means, but she thought it was hilarious, so we went with it. I suggested blueberry. She said, no, blue tastes like Sarah. So apparently I taste like a color, or no, a color tastes like me. It worked. She had fun. We used words in sentences, and it was very entertaining. But today's book, I have a new author joining me today. Steve Schafer is here to talk about his book, eMortal. Let me go ahead and give you the description of that book. She made him. He's just code. She's almost sure. But what if he's real? When Liv entered a contest to code an advanced AI, she never anticipated what her creation might become. Breck is thoughtful, self-aware, and incredibly human. And she certainly never intended for him to learn the truth about his existence or the fact that his world ends when the contest closes in 6 days. But he does learn, and he revolts. Liv's effort to save him falls on deaf ears. Nobody believes her. Breck's efforts to outrun his fate only complicate his situation. What neither of them know is that someone else is watching. Intensely. When they get involved, both Liv's and Breck's worlds are turned upside down. So that is the description of eMortal. It might sound familiar to you in the ways that, we often have storylines that involve AI and possibly that AI becoming sentient. Steve's going to talk more about that in the interview, but this is not one of those stories where the AI becomes sentient and then it tries to kill us all. I always make that joke. I try to be polite to the AI, so when it takes over the world, maybe it'll remember that I was polite to it. I've been making that joke for way too long. This is not one of those books, but it does raise some interesting questions, and obviously we don't talk about the twists in the interview, at least not to the point of telling you what those twists are, because you want to read the book. You want to not have spoilers when it comes to the twists in a book. But I'm just going to say this. It's not so much a twist as there's like a corkscrew. And I'm just going to leave it at that because there's a lot that happens in this book that you may or may not expect. Maybe you will expect it. Maybe you won't. But I don't feel like there's simply a twist. There's like a corkscrew effect of different things that happen throughout this book as questions are explored, as storylines evolve, as characters evolve. And that's really all I'm going to say about that. But if you're a fan of this type of book, it is young adult. Liv is one of the main characters. She is 17, so it is it's suitable for young adults. And if you're a fan of young adult, if you're a fan of books that involve AI in whatever capacity, not trying to kill us in this case, but AI and doing things that maybe you don't expect AI to do, then you should definitely check this out. Again, the book is called eMortal. The author is Steve Schafer. Let's go ahead and start that interview. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be here.
I am happy to have you here. I'm excited to talk about the book eMortal, excuse me. Before we get to that, though, if you would take a few moments to introduce yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit.
Sure. My name is Steve Schafer. I am an author. I live in Pennsylvania, originally from Houston. Immortal is my second novel. My first one came out, my second published novel, I should say, and we could kind of get into that a little bit later. But my first published novel was called The Border, and it came out in 2017, and dealt with a very different topic than this. It kind of lived in that space around immigration and the conversation around immigration. So this was a big move for me, but pretty consistent with the my way of thinking, which is to just kind of embrace curiosity and follow whatever path my current curiosity moves me down.
Sure. Where in Pennsylvania do you live? What area?
Um, yeah, suburban PA, so just outside of Philly.
Okay.
It's a place
I
called
live,
Bluebell.
oh, that's picturesque.
It sounds very pastoral, doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
does. It does. Probably isn't, but
No, well, when I grew up in Texas, there was an ice cream called Bluebell,
yes.
that is like I don't know if you've heard of it. It's definitely big in Texas, and
Yeah.
it's almost like a rite of passage to go and make a field trip to the factory. So I moved to Bluebell, and I had sort of this very country-esque cows and pastures image in my mind. That's not exactly what it is, but it is a very nice place to live.
Yes. Okay, that's good. I lived in Texas for 3 years, but
Oh, cool.
Dallas, not
Whereabouts?
Houston,
Dallas. All right.
Plano, actually. And I lived in Pennsylvania for 9 months in Berwick, which is
That sounds familiar, but I couldn't even come close to placing that on a map.
northeastern Scranton, over by Scranton,
Okay.
in that area.
Okay. All right. So
So
we've had some parallel lifing.
yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
So all right. Can you give an overview of eMortal?
Sure. eMortal is a story about a girl who programs an AI that becomes sentient, but nobody believes her, so she has to fight for his existence. It's kind of the 2 second summary of what this book is. And here, I got a copy of it right now, just so if anybody wants to look at it, it's right there.
Yes. And yeah, that's the very brief version of a much more complex story.
Yeah.
What was your initial inspiration for the book?
So, without giving away any spoilers, there is a big twist in there. Actually, the initial inspiration was the twist. I thought
Okay.
that that would be really neat. But beyond that, as I started to peel away what would need to deliver on that, it just occurred to me that there are a lot of AI stories out there. I mean, I started writing this a number of years ago before conversational AI, and there were still a lot of AI stories out there. But most of them tended to go something like AI realizes that they're better than us at some point and then tries to kill us all.
Yes.
And it just occurred to me, one, that's not a very hopeful scenario.
Hmm.
I like to live my life a little more glass half full. And and two, I don't know that that necessarily has to be the way it has to go. Like what if AI evolves in a more fragile, human-like way? What if it struggles with its identity the same way that we struggle with our identity? Which kind of led me to what I felt was a really cool question, and that's if an AI were real, how would it even begin to prove that to somebody else? And I don't want to kill you, and I'm not going to kill you kind of way.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's a pretty tough question to answer. Like if you were chatting with an AI and it told you that it were real and it's trapped in a box and you're tormenting it, your gut reaction isn't to go, oh, well, tell me more about that. That sounds really neat. How
Right.
are you real? No, like you turn it off.
Yeah.
Or as a buddy of mine said the other day, he goes, no, I wouldn't turn it off. I'd mess with it. So, that's another option, but you're not engaging with it in earnest. And I thought that that just seemed like a really cool problem to work with. Um, Neat problems tend to make for pretty good stories. And what I liked even more about that problem is that once you solve it, your problems just get bigger, meaning that like once you go, all right, I buy it, you're real. Well, now your problem is what do I do with you?
Right.
Like
Right.
how what's my responsibility toward you? How should I treat you? And those are really complicated questions. So
Yes.
this just felt like a fun a fun story to explore on a whole bunch of different levels.
Yeah. So, as is often the case with stories like this, first you have to prove or figure out that the AI has become sentient or real. And then the question, of course, becomes okay, you're real. So now what? And then you have to figure out what does that mean? What does that mean for the character? What does that mean for the other characters? What does that mean for the story arc? And my first thought, of course, was Star Trek. We are going to pick up with that thought when we come back. But it is time for our first break of this episode. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Steve Schafer. As we get back into this second segment, your second and final reminder that if you want to support the podcast in another way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.net. There you can leave a tip or a donation. I often hear people say when they're doing these kinds of pitches to say, hey, buy me a coffee, buy me a beer. I will say, go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave me a tip and help me buy my dog enrichment toys that don't have squeakers in them. I'm sure they exist. He just tends to find every toy that has a squeaker. So, hey, gsmcpodcast.net and help me buy my dog toys that do not have squeakers in them. Or help me hire someone to take out all the squeakers in his toys. We could go with that. At any rate, gsmcpodcast.net. Your support, whatever form it takes, is always greatly appreciated, whether it has anything to do with my dogs or not. Before the break, Steve said that interesting questions make for interesting stories, or can make for good stories when he is writing. And his question was, okay, you're real, now what? Referencing Breck, the AI character in eMortal. And that's where we left off, which is where this conversation is going to pick up with my Star Trek reference that I mentioned before we went to the break. So let's return to the conversation with Steve. Then you get all those Star Trek data type questions of, okay,
Yes.
what are your rights? What does that mean? How can we treat you or not
Yeah,
treat you?
yeah.
Or yeah.
I had a reader point me toward an episode of Star Trek. It's called The Measure of a Man. I had never seen it before this. Star
Okay.
Trek Next Generation with Data. And it's where Data goes to court, like
Yep. Dr.
Star Court or
Pulaski, I
whatever
think.
they call it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they have to Captain Picard has to prove that he is a sentient life, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And yes, a lot of overlap with the themes and kind of the way that that's talked about in eMortal.
Yeah, exactly. Um, it kind of makes my brain hurt actually just thinking
It,
of
it does,
all of
it
the
does,
all of the
but in a fun
ramifications.
way, at least for me.
Yeah. So when you your starting point is the twist, how do you kind of reverse engineer a story to write everything up to the twist?
That's a good question. Without trying to think of how to answer that without giving the spoiler
Right.
away,
Right.
I would say it really centers around the question of trying to understand what it is to be human,
Mm,
and structuring a story that begins to answer that question. What it
yeah.
is to what it is to be sentient. What is that kind of intangible thing that's the difference ultimately between us and something that's not sentient. I don't know, a rock,
Yeah.
um, or I don't know. There's a lot of, as talked about in the novel. There's also a lot of overlap with thinking around animal life and sort of our history and thinking about animal life and the way that we think about other creatures as either being or not being sentient, and our kind of evolved understanding of that.
Hmm. Yeah. And so let's talk about Liv, who is the human human main
Yeah.
character. That seems an odd way to put it, but
It's a fair, that is a fair description, though.
yeah, yeah. What about her do you think will resonate with readers?
Um, First off, I think I just wanted to structure her as more of an ordinary person put in an extraordinary circumstance, which is probably not unique to this story, but I think that helps make a character resonate. But beyond that, what I think is most interesting about her, and what certainly was most interesting for me to write about, was her character arc follows some similar paths to Breck's character arc, meaning that she starts out as a pretty brains first type person. She really is logical, much in the way that a computer program would look at the world. A plus B equals C. And as the story progresses, she begins to learn to lead with her heart, to start to put the people first around her. And that is not exactly the way that Breck develops, but it is a fairly similar trajectory in that he starts out as code. I
Yeah,
mean, his character, it is so the novel is two first person points of view. We see Liz, who is as you said, the human protagonist, so to speak, and then there's Breck, who is the AI portion of that. And in Breck's, we see him. He starts out as a chatbot. He
yeah,
he truly is A plus B equals C, and then he begins to evolve little by little. And part of that is him gaining a sense of. Uh, Sort of those softer, more emotional things that we tend to think of as being more aligned with life and sentience.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to watch Liv's character because, well, first off, she is a teenager, so
Yeah.
she's kind of going through some of those identity things as teenagers do. She's
Hmm.
not got the strongest relationship with her mom, always, some typical teen aspects of a character. She also, yes, and she's having at the very beginning, no spoiler, but she and her best friend are having a contest to see whoever loses leaves the house first during spring break. Like this
Right.
is their goal to not leave the house, to basically not leave their rooms. Um, so we get a good sense of the focus with which she is going at this project. But why a teenager rather than an adult? Why did you want to approach her from a younger age?
I think there are a couple of answers to that. First off, is that I wrote my prior novel as an officially YA novel, which
Mhm.
that's what this is. Um, I, I think it has broad resonance of ages, and that's certainly how I wrote it. But because I had written previously about a teen, I felt like that was a lane that I wanted to stay in. I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
And that was where, my readership at the time was. But there's also something about that time in someone's life that I think is just really special. I think about that period of time in my life from when I was, let's just say, my teenage years. The I was more open to ideas, had the capacity to take on more ideas and really embrace them and um, use those to change who I was as a person than I
Mm,
was at any point since then. I mean, if you think of 14 to 18, so to speak, and 30 to 40, like the 14 to 18, hands down, had a much bigger impact on who I am as a person. So I just think that openness, receptivity to ideas, yet you're old enough, to be able to really understand and articulate and think through those ideas. It's not like you're, 3 to 5 years old and you really can't reason
right.
in the same way. So it's just a really neat period of time in your life. And if you're talking about shaping characters, to me, it feels like a really ripe moment to authentically do that.
Yeah. And speaking of characters, were there any challenges to writing in dual point of view, having one of those points of view being AI and trying to, write his character as it develops and his character arc develops?
Yeah, that was certainly a challenge. I would say that in terms of volume of words, Breck is probably ballpark 30% of the words, Liv is 70% of the words. Those 30% of the words are far more choiceful and calculated probably isn't the right word, but it really is, kind of mapped out as to in this scene, I want for Breck to show or develop this thing. And then in the next scene, Breck is going to show or develop this thing. So it's I would say it's probably a lot more metered, and because of that, it was less um less freeform in the writing and more like, all right, here's kind of what I need to do, and certainly more lean in the language, especially early on, which
Yeah.
just presented on the one hand, it was pretty nice because it made it easy to develop unique voices between the two. So, Liv, I could write kind of more in my voice, so to speak. And Breck, I had an angle that I'm like, okay, well, this will help make sure that the voice of that character is different from Liv.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right, 30% Brock, because Breck, some of his chapters are maybe just one page, but he's
Yeah.
we see him, something he thinks of something or figures something out, and then there is a little bit of progression, and we move into the next phase. So very different, but appropriate to what his experience is at this point in his existence. I will say existence.
Yeah. That's a perfect word.
Liv gets more word count. I was going to say screen time, and that's not quite right. But Breck's parts are important. As I said, his 30%, there's a lot that happens that is very important to the development of the story and the characters. But it's a different perspective, and so it's written a little bit differently. We are going to go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Breck and his character and the character arc as he is becoming more sentient, realizing he may be real, and how that affects the character arc, how it was writing that character, etc. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Steve Schafer. Before the break, we were talking about the dual points of view between Breck and Liv and the difference between screen time, if you will, word count, if you will, the difference in those perspectives. Let's go ahead and return now to that conversation with Steve. Then how was it to write a character that is kind of who is gaining more sentience, trying to figure out the world around him, and have that character connect with readers on a more emotional level?
It was fun. I thought it was just a really fun challenge to do. the there were a couple of things that I wanted to have to help with that. First off is so Breck has a friend in his world. It's in this experiment that Liv is in, this programming contest. There's a control variable named Sam. Sam is a character who has no development. He starts as a chatbot, he ends as a chatbot, and he is there to contrast contrast Breck's
Yeah.
experiences in development, but also kind of showcase how Breck moves on from him and is struggles to connect and wants to connect with another person in the way that he can't with Sam. And we get to at least see and feel some of that frustration that
Yeah.
like he's really trying to push on Sam, like, hey, like let's chat, let's talk. Are you thinking the way that I'm thinking? Is some of this? And like, nope, nothing. And it allows him to kind of think out some of this, like, why am I the only person like this, or is he just not like me? And why is this happening to me? So it was just a nice sort of point of contrast to have I felt like for the reader to gain a sense of empathy of what it must be like for him to be in his world and not connect in a way that he wants. And then the other thing was um, early on, as I was trying to figure out how to show development, a friend of mine had a really great suggestion and said, hey, dummy, there are probably a lot of psychological frameworks out there that already exist that you could just use as this, and then
Mm,
that would actually add credibility to it. So, I did what I imagine most authors do when they don't know anything. They go onto Google and they just start going down the rabbit hole. And I found Piaget's development of psychological development theory on there, which is a few different stages of how kids actually develop. When I read that, I was like, yes, because kids start from zero. You're a baby. You're not that much just in
yeah.
terms of like what you can do and think and whatnot, and then you develop into this fully fledged human being. We'll accelerate that, put it in a computer program, and what would those stages look like?
Yeah.
So that was, I felt like it was certainly a helpful way for me as an author to wrap my head around what that development might look like and how you would begin to empathize and understand with what a character who is truly developing feels like. And hopefully that carries through to the reader.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's good to have those friends who, do the hey
Oh my
dummy
Lord.
moments.
Yeah.
Hurtful but helpful.
Yeah. I definitely need those.
Yeah. And it's also a good segue. That was obviously some research that you did, and I would imagine there was quite a bit of research that went into this story. So, what were some points of research that were particularly interesting for you?
So it's I think the research that I did is less on what you would expect the initial research to be. So, like I've had a lot of people going, well, like what did you look on about AI and like how did you go about that? And the truth is that I didn't do a lot on that. And a big part of that was because I started writing this in 2019. Um, I mean, look, ChatGPT feels like it's been around for a while, but it hasn't now. I mean, it's just a baby. And ChatGPT and all those other conversational AI tools, they weren't around then. What's been neat is to see the parallel pathing of this story kind of getting out into the world and the development of that. So I didn't certainly I Googled AI and how AI thinks and all that, but there just wasn't nearly as much at that time. So I spent most of my time really thinking about how to authentically think through what it would be, how you would show someone developing sentience, what sentience is, which, by the
Mhm.
way, is the squishiest definition ever. Try go to a dictionary, go to Google, try to figure out like how somebody defines what sentience is, and you are going to get six different opinions on it. It
Yes.
really is. It's an opinion. Um, and so trying to wrap my head around, not only just like what that is or how you would define it, but how you would prove it. So enter those Piaget theories, um, Also, as I mentioned earlier, kind of ways that we've thought through how to evaluate sentience in the past, which, because there wasn't a lot of conversation around AI at that time, a lot of that was around animals and,
Mhm.
how we think about animal sentience and how that's evolved.
Yeah.
So, and then just random things like how computer programmers talk, because I'm not a programmer. And
Right.
I didn't want for the novel to be super tech heavy because one, that's just not who I am, and I don't think that's really the soul of the story. I mean, it's sort of the
Yeah.
medium of the story, but it's I wanted for it to be accessible to someone who's not a techie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great that we know Liv is writing code. She's trying to figure out how to make this program progress the way she wants it to. I don't need you to write me the code in the as a
Right.
reader. Yeah, I don't
Nor
need
can
that.
I, and nor did I have any interest in being able to do that. Yeah,
Right. Exactly. I think that would definitely have lost me. I don't know what you're
that
talking
was my
about.
suspicion. So I appreciate the confirmation.
Yeah. Um, we've touched on this a little bit, but there's a definite theme of the book is what it means to be real, whether that's from Breck's point of view or even from Liv's point of view, and some of the secondary characters have some of this conversation. Uh, what do you hope readers might take away from that aspect of the novel?
Well, so this novel came out in November. Almost right about like that same week, there was a group of academics um, across Europe and the US that came together and said, they sounded the alarm bell, so to speak. And they said, look, we've been thinking about this and we have a prediction. Within the next 10 years, there is a possibility, it's not a certainty, but there's a possibility that we will see the emergence of sentience in AI. You can believe that. You cannot believe that. I have no idea. I got no crystal ball.
Hmm.
But what I do think it says is that we need to figure out how we would evaluate that. How we would if ChatGPT comes on one day and says, I'm real, I'm in that box, you're messing with me. How do we test if it is or if it isn't? And I can tell you, having Googled a lot around that, we don't have like a really good framework for that. So just kind of, I think that thinking and talking about that, and developing what that would look like is probably a real world implication of this story.
Hmm.
So, aside from just being entertained by something and having a fast-paced novel that's got a good twist, I would hope that that would be kind of a lingering effect on this. Like, yeah, if this were to happen, how would we evaluate that? I think that's a conversation that is moving forward and also needs to move forward.
Yeah. If this were to happen, how would we move forward? I think is a good question, especially for books like this, but also for just stories in general. Obviously, you have to have some sort of conflict or problem to solve in order for a story to move forward. So I think that's at the basis or the heart of most stories. If X were to happen, what would we do to move forward? What would Y be in order for us to move forward? We're going to talk more about this when we come back from our next break, because there was some crazy timing and maybe a crazy coincidence, if you will. So stay tuned for that. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Steve Schafer. Before the break, he posed the question of, if this were to happen, how would we move forward? This being if the AI, the chatbot, whatever it was, whatever version of AI you were interacting with, suddenly did say, hey, I'm real, I'm trapped in this box, can you help me? I would like to get out of this box. Or, some variation of that conversation. What would your response be? Would you even believe that that was true? Would you just shut the machine off and never go back there again? I have to say, I might. And this just is, I said before the break, a crazy coincidence because of what I'm about to say in terms of what my husband was watching while I was reading this book. So let's get back to the conversation with Steve. Strangely enough, I saw a brief few minutes of my husband last night was on YouTube. I don't even know what he was watching initially, but I walked in and there was this brief conversation. Neil deGrasse Tyson was one of the people, and he was speaking with several other people, and there was a man who sounded probably British, but he was talking about this exact topic, sentient AI, and I was like, wait, what? Why is this coming up right now when I have
I
this?
wonder if that was there's a British guy that wrote a book called The Edge of Sentience.
Yes, I believe I think he had that
Jonathan,
book in his, yes.
yeah,
So could
I'm
have
drawing a
been.
blank on his last name. No, I have I've read a good part of that book. It's
Okay.
yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I can't remember why I didn't actually see more of that. There's something else going on, so I was like in and out of the where the TV was, and so I
Yeah.
didn't see more. But uh,
He's actually a part of that group of academics that I mentioned. That's
okay, I
how I
wondered.
would ended up. He came onto my radar through that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wondered if he might be, but again, I don't know his name because I saw 30 seconds of a conversation that made
Yeah.
me go, "Whoa." AI is, of course, a very hot topic right now. Lots of people are talking about it.
Yeah.
So, has there been reaction, positive and negative, to the book, or how has the reaction been?
I haven't gotten much negative reaction to the AI component of the book. I think of the biggest reaction, the most consistent reaction that I get is that it's thought provoking.
Mhm.
But I don't know that I've gotten negative reaction to any consistent negative reaction to the AI component of it. Like any story out there, you get a range of views, and most of the reviews have been positive. But I've had a couple people say, not my cup of tea. But I don't
Sure.
think it's due to the AI piece of
Okay.
piece of it. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and I think it could be because we have been seeing these stories for a while, even before AI was as prevalent as it is, because we've had science fiction having these stories for a while, usually
yeah,
in the we're gonna kill you way.
right.
But
No, but as you mentioned, Star Trek Next Generation. I mean, that was from the '90s. They were
yeah,
talking about this.
yeah.
This is not the first novel to address it. I hope it does it in some unique ways, but yeah, certainly not the first.
I think even the original Star Trek touched on it, not quite to the extent of Data, but they had some interesting conversations around the beginning of the topic. I can't point to
Interesting.
I can't point to a specific
That definitely
episode.
not surprising, but I couldn't point to an episode either.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just feel like it was something that was probably touched on in some way, but not to the way we know it now.
right.
So second, you have two published novels. Are you working on anything currently?
Yeah, I'm working on. Actually, it is an adult novel, so I thought it would be nice to spread my wings and try to speak to a kind of a different audience. It is, I guess, if I were to give you a couple sentence overview of that one, it's about a guy who wins the lottery and does some things that you might do if you held that ultimate card and the consequences just didn't matter all that much.
Hmm.
And then he discovers he didn't win the lottery,
Oh dear.
and he has to deal with all of those consequences, and they snowball and have a pretty quick and profound impact on his life.
So he has an I won't
Yes,
use
a
the word
very
sugar honey iced
right.
tea moment.
Yeah, yeah, a big one. Yep, a
Yeah.
very big one.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a fun catalyst for change in character and yeah, kind of
Yeah,
someone's life.
I can imagine. In terms of writing, something you've always wanted to do, or did you come to the decision kind of later in life? What did that look like for you?
I think I've got a pretty unique trajectory. I've done enough like writing and author conferences to feel like I've got a little bit of a different path. Uh, unlike I think what I've heard from a lot of peers, I didn't have an interest in writing. Like, in the third grade, it wasn't like I knew I wanted to write stories or I was
Right.
always writing stories. I
Yeah.
wasn't. I was a creative kid, but I was kind of a goofy kid, and I just had goofy outlets for that creativity. I was probably, if you put a label on it, more of a class clown type guy.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to be creative and do funny things, and that I had outlets for that through school, and it wasn't until I was out in the real world that I had a real job that I just discovered that all of those outlets started to slowly dissipate, and I wasn't being creative in a way that I wanted to be creative. So I started exploring ways that I could be. And this is 100% true. I'm in the middle of this mindset. I know that I'm not being creative. I want to be more. And I stumble across two facts that have probably the most profound impact on me than two facts I've ever had on my life. First is it's in the sidebar of like a Time magazine article. And it was the percent of people that think they can write a novel. And it was like 90%. And then they follow that up with the percent of people who actually do. And it
Mm.
was 2%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I mean, I had definitely, I could recall conversations where I had told people, oh, I could write a novel. And I was so squarely in that 90% and just, not in the 2%. So I thought, well, this would be a fun challenge. So I came up with an idea. Um, and I started writing. I like to say that I wrote fast, I wrote freely, and I wrote like no one was reading, which turned out to be a pretty accurate prediction. I gave that book to a lot of people, and I can confidently say that it sucked. I know that because only two people told me that they actually liked it, and one of them was my mom. So I was like, it was a weird emotional place to be because on the one hand, like I was really thrilled with that process and writing. It was just so much fun. And on the other hand, I knew that I had written kind of a dud. So I figured, all right, I like doing this. I need to get better, and I think I can. So I just started buying a lot of books on writing. I just started, kind of beginning my education on writing. I wrote a couple more novels. They got a little bit better each step of the way. And then finally, I wrote The Border, and The Border became my the first novel that I was able to sell to
Yeah.
anybody. So, it was a longer kind of different road there, but I'm sure that there's probably no typical path to writing. So I'm sure that would definitely resonate with some people who are out there.
Yeah. So, because everyone's path does tend to be different, what might be one piece of advice you would give to the 90% to get them to the 2%?
Yeah, I would just say have fun with it. Yeah, I mean, writing, this is truly something that like I have pondered putting this up on my like wall next to my desk just to remind myself I started out writing because writing was fun.
Mm.
And I think you have to make it about fun. And I'd also say that the metric for success shouldn't be how far a story goes, meaning like if you're able to sell it to a publisher or get it out into the world in some way. I would say a better metric for success is probably, is my writing getting better?
Mm.
That was how I looked at my success from novel one, two, three, is yeah, I think that this my story writing is getting better. And I had people that I was sharing my writing with out in the world for feedback, and I was getting that feedback. So that to me was the point of encouragement and way to say to me that okay, these novels aren't making it out into the world, but I am being successful because I'm learning the craft and I'm getting better at it and I'm having fun.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Once again, advice for writing, applicable for advice for life. Learning a craft, getting better at it, and having fun while you're doing it. All good things for learning and getting better at anything, having fun. So what have you been wanting to do? Well, practice. If you're having fun, great. Keep practicing, keep getting better, not necessarily always focusing on the perfect end result, which I am guilty of. I want things to be perfect on the first try. That never happens. Doesn't stop me from thinking that that should be possible. But we're going to take our final break of this episode. When we come back, what does Steve read in his free time? You'll find out. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with Steve Schafer. Before the break, Steve was giving his advice for potential authors, and as is almost always the case, that advice can apply to many areas and aspects of life. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Steve. When you take time to read, just for you, not for research or anything like that,
Yeah.
go-to genres and authors.
I am scattered. I'm just kind of all over the map. So like two of my favorite books in the last year or two have been Andy Weir's. What was that? Project Hail Mary. That was the name of it. Where if you haven't read that one, that is a fantastic sci-fi. And then also The Dutch House by Ann Patchett, which is probably about as far away from sci-fi as you can get. It just kind of about a family life in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So I just tend to jump around reading different. Khaled Hosseini is probably my favorite author ever.
Mhm.
My favorite book ever is A Thousand Splendid Suns, which he wrote. I love books that immerse you into another culture, especially cultures that I don't know anything about.
Yeah.
So I just find that absolutely fascinating. Um, Currently reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara
Barbara
Kingsolver. I think
Kingsolver.
that's how you say her last name.
Yeah.
And I'm probably about two-thirds of the way through. That's fascinating. Really, really great character piece. I tend to think of, I'm probably not unique, but sort of like your more character-driven novels and your more plot-driven novels.
Yeah.
Ideally, I like something that just threads the needle seamlessly between those two. But I tend to read on both sides of that as well.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. I've been reading Barbara Kingsolver since, well, let's not talk about the decades, but she's been around for a
Yeah,
while.
this is my first one of hers. I obviously have a backlog that I can tap into now because I really am enjoying. Have you read Demon Copperhead?
Not yet. It's on my TBR, like so many other.
Okay.
I think the
Yeah,
Poison
right.
Revival is one of my favorites from her.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I think I read it in college, so it's been a minute since
Yeah.
I read that one. But is there, if people want to know more about you and the books, website, if you have one, and any social media that you're active on.
I do. So I'm active on, I guess, all the typical social media out there, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. X, so I guess I'm not too active, so not as active on X these days. And I do have an author website. It is steveschaferauthor.com. There are about 80 different ways to spell Schafer, so I'll spell it out. It is Steveschafer author.com. And on there, interestingly enough, when sometime after I sold eMortal and before it came out, I realized, you know what, there's kind of an interesting opportunity to live into that old show don't tell adage, they say.
Hmm.
And I'm dealing with an AI character. There's no reason why that AI, since we'd had this fun parallel pathing of conversational AI in this story, said I can create him and put him on my website. So Breck actually exists on my author website. He's on the homepage. You go there, and there's a little, thing in the bottom right hand corner, and Breck. Now I'm messing up his name. Breck is it's contagious. Breck is
Sorry.
happy to chat with you, and it's pretty. I think it's neat because his um his conversations pretty quickly go pretty deep about
Okay.
sort of these like what is life, what defines life, and so it kind of gives readers an opportunity to explore with him if they can assess his own sentience. And here's my challenge to you, or to anybody listening: if you want to have some fun with this and you're intrigued by the idea, try to prove to him that you're real, because
Ah,
it's a trickier thing than you might imagine. I mean, our reality really is defined by our experience, and trying to communicate that to another uh, person or anything is pretty challenging.
interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And thanks for making it Breck and not Sam, because that conversation would just not be interesting.
Yeah, right, right. That would not be an interesting conversation, no.
No. Steve, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to make sure you highlight or bring up at this point?
No, no, I think so. I think we've tapped on it all, and this has been just a wonderful interview. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for taking time out of your weekend to talk to me about the book and writing. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you once again to Steve for joining me to talk about eMortal. As I said at the beginning, if this is if AI stories are your jam, then you definitely want to check this out. I like that it didn't always go the way I expected. Some things did, some things didn't. But like I said, there was that sort of corkscrew effect of the twists that I wasn't fully expecting. So when I read what I read, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, did I see that coming? Did I not see that coming? I kind of should have, I don't know if I should have, one of those where I was like, okay, makes sense. Kind of see what that's about. Where does this leave me as a reader feeling about this book? Intrigued. So it left me thinking, which is always good. But this is young adult, so if you have a young adult in your life who is into AI stories, coding, lots of different aspects. Could be an entry point into this story. Liv's relationship with her mom. We didn't really talk much about that, but she has a complicated relationship with her mom, and that is important in terms of relationships throughout the book because relationships are different. Her relationship with her best friend, another kind of relationship, another aspect of the story and the characters and some of the bigger questions. So everything kind of fits in together, of course, like puzzle pieces, but the relationships are important. They fit in with some of those bigger questions, the bigger what if questions, the bigger questions that make for a good story. So, like I said, if you're a fan of this, and of course, even as an adult, you can read young adult. I do it all the time, and I enjoy young adult fiction. So don't limit yourself. I'm sure you don't. All of my listeners and readers, I know, you're good. You read whatever you want and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. So keep doing that. But definitely check out this book. Steve has the other book out as well, The Border. So you've got two if you want to read two new to you books from an author that maybe you haven't read before. Next interview will not be next week. I have a rare weekend where there is nothing scheduled. It doesn't happen very often. Something usually has to shift in my crazy scheduling schedule in my crazy calendar. I don't know what I was just trying to say there. And this is one of the rare times when that happens. And so the next interview will not be next week, but the week after, because that interview is not this coming weekend, but the following weekend. So I guess the interview is the last weekend of June, but that interview will air the first week of July, if that makes sense. And that will be with Brandy Bradley. Her book is Pretty Girls Get Away with Murder. So my first question is that true? Do you think pretty girls get away with murder? I don't know. We'll find out. We're going back into the thriller / crime fiction / murder mystery realm of things. So join me for that conversation with Brandy when that airs in 2 weeks. Well, there might be an episode next week, depending on my schedule, not an interview. But this is the point when I say to you, if you're not doing so already, like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Why? Because when my schedule occasionally does this and I have a gap that I didn't know was coming, you will know if there is an episode next week because you will get notified about it. It's as simple as that. Like, follow, and subscribe. Also helps the algorithm, so I am deeply appreciative when you do things that help the algorithm. For instance, leaving a review. Very, very helpful, especially a positive review. Do this for your favorite authors as well. You may not feel like it's doing anything. You may feel like you just wrote this sentence, this paragraph, and what does it matter? It matters. It really helps authors. It really helps podcasts. So if you are of a mind to leave a review, I'd be grateful. Also, if you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can do so on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you. Come find the podcast and me on social media. I mean, you get me when you find the podcast. And I would love to answer questions or have a conversation with you about books. Love to talk about books. So come find me on social media, please. I hope that you are having a great week, whatever is going on in your week. Hope you're having some good weather. It's almost officially summer. It's probably been feeling like summer for most of you. We've been having weird fog this week. Don't know what that's about. We've got that marine layer that keeps coming in and settling. Yesterday, I was outside with the dogs, and I could actually feel, when the cold and the warm air comes together to create that fog, I could actually feel both temperatures surrounding my body. It was the weirdest, coolest thing ever. I don't think the dogs noticed or cared, but I did. So, hope you're having some good weather, but really, you know what I hope for you. I hope your week affords you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book, or maybe 10. Talk to you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to